Well, respite services really started by the Governor's Planning Council, actually. It was one of those services that began in the late 70s to be thought about anyway. There was a state law that passed, I think it was Public Law 22, I believe. And it provided what they called, the legislature called family subsidy. And it was supposed to be, it was a pot of money that the Division on Mental Retardation, which I was attached to, was to distribute. And I was the one put in charge of that. And so one of the things that I had to do was define what family subsidy was, because the legislature didn't. They just put a pot of money there. It was a small pot of money at that. It was only about $150,000. And so along with Bob Spalding, who was my boss at the time, we developed a definition of family subsidy that included respite services as one of its service forms. And so this money could be distributed to various entities, mainly the local community agency, to be used to support a respite program. So we tried to define what respite services were and what it would constitute and so on. Generally, respite services meant that it was a form of support for the family to allow a caregiver some break from the responsibilities of service that included management of that person at home. And usually it was for the use of parents who could have one person sit during their absence and feel confident that that person would take good care of their child, whether it's adult or a minor child. So it began very small as that. And then fairly soon after that subsidy, the council came through with money for a respite services program. And they were willing to underwrite the administrative cost of managing respite services. So they would pay for, based on the grant criteria, they would pay for certain aspects of the administration of respite services. So some agencies then began to develop a respite program that included respite reimbursement for respite administration and the use of family subsidy money to buy respite services. And so those agencies began to train people and match people and talk to people about how they might use services and so on. So that began to develop in the late 70s and 80s in general. And then again, as the Medicaid waiver and the so-called filling out of the continuum, as I mentioned before, respite services became one of those defined services. And so the waiver began to take up support, and the state began to back off from its investment in respite services per se, and except to the extent they matched the money for the federal funds. So respite services began to become, it did become finally a Medicaid waiver program, and overseen through those mechanisms.